Hello, this is Life to Tape. I'm doing a recorded, no edit kind of stream of consciousness reading of the book, the Vicki Barr Air Stewardess series, and this story is The Clue of the Golden Coin by Helen Wells. So we're going to start off with chapter 3. I just have to find my place. And the name of chapter 3 is An Odd Offer. Vicki said goodbye to Captain March, Johnny, and Kathy, and strolled leisurely through the air terminal waiting room. Watching the milling crowds of people always fascinated her. One could certainly pick out the Yankees who had just come in, she thought. The northern winter parlor contrasted sharply with the deep sun-browned skins of the local residents. It suddenly struck Vicki that she was a Yankee herself. I have to go to the beach and start working on my own suntan, she thought, the first time I have a day off. A rack of colorful picture postcards caught her eye. Gosh, here it is, her second trip to Florida, and she hadn't sent a single card. That was the first thing any respectable Floridian visitor did. She selected a dozen of the most exotic cards, those that had depicted wide sandy beaches, palm-lined streets, and moonlight over Tampa Bay, and the Jose Gasparilla sailing up the bay with hundreds of bright pennants flying from its mast, and its deck crowded with the mystic crew. Leaning on the counter, she addressed one to her father, one to her mother, and one to Ginny, who adored getting mail in her own name. One to Bill Avery, and one to each of the girls who shared her apartment in New York. Then, just for fun, she addressed one to Mr. Curtin, to Nina, and to Louise. On each of these last three, she wrote, "I'm so glad to be here. Love, Vicki." She bought stamps from the machine on the counter and mailed the cards in the postal drop nearby, and strolled on the main door to hail a taxi. On her way, she passed the terminal snack bar. An ice cream soda, it suddenly occurred to her, would taste just about right on a hot day like this. She pushed open the swinging glass door and entered the dim, air-conditioned room. The first person she saw was Joy Watson, sitting in one of the booths. She started toward him, then checked herself when she saw that another man, who was sitting in the seat opposite him, started towards him, then checked herself when she saw that another man was sitting in the seat opposite to him. Vicki decided not to intrude in what was probably man talk. She slipped into the next booth with her back to the man who was sitting with Joey. The man was speaking in a low voice, but it was deep-toned and resonated. The man spoke with a soft Spanish accent and had a particular, almost indiscernible lisp. Since he was separated from Vicki only by a thin plywood partition, she couldn't help hearing every word he said. She paid no attention to the conversation and ordered her soda from the waitress. Then a sentence caught her ear. "And you're such a nice kid, Joey, that I want to help you. You're smart and ambitious, and I like to help boys like you." "But why would you want to help me?" Joey's voice was puzzled. "You never saw me before, and, why, I don't even know your name." "Now that does surprise me a little, Joey. With all the business I do with the Federal Airlines, I'm surprised you don't know the name of Raymond Duke. I think I have seen your name on cargo consignments," Joey said hesitantly. "Sure you have, kid," the man said. "I'm one of the biggest importers in Tampa, and you can bet that I've heard about Joey Watson. Your boss, Van, what's his name? Van Lasher? Sure, Van Lasher says you're the smartest man he's got. He tells me you're saving up for flying lessons and that you need money real bad. Well, I can fix that, kid. If you work for me, I can put a lot of money your way." Vicky's ears pricked up. Vicky's ears pricked up. This conversation was certainly taking a curious turn. Now she began to listen intently, careful to catch each word. She felt responsible for Joey Watson and the proposition this man seemed to be trying to make to him sounded mighty strange indeed. Now, in my business, the man went on, I can always use a smart boy. Think you'd like to work for me? I pay mighty well. Gee, Mr. Duke, Joey said, I've already got a good job. I like working around airplanes, and I'm already starting to take flying lessons, or I'll be starting any day now. No, thanks a lot, but I don't think I'd like to leave the airline. Who said anything about leaving the airline, kid? What I want you to do is work for me in your spare time. Do odd jobs, run errands, things like that. Why, I've got a job coming up that will pay you. How does $100 sound? $100, Joey almost shouted. Not so loud, boy. Not so loud, the man cautioned. I don't go around offering good jobs to everybody I see. I don't want every Tom, Dick, and Harry pestering me for work. This is confidential, just between you and me. Gee, Joey said, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? 100 smackers would sure pay for a lot of flying lessons, boy. At the rate you're going, you'll be an old man before you get your pilot's license. Look, Joey, I'll tell you what to do. You agree to work for me, and I'll give you $25 in advance. Vicki heard the man's flip some crisp bills. Look at that, kid. That's just to show I trust you. And there's plenty more where that came from. Gosh, Mr. Duke, I have to think it over. Nothing doing, Vicki heard Mr. Duke say. When I make a man a good proposition at this, I expect him to say yes or no. Besides, I've got a job that needs to be done right away. Now what do you say, boy? That money looks pretty good, doesn't it? I'll bet you never saw that much before in your life. So what is it? Yes or no? Gee, Mr. Duke, Joey's voice was wavering with indecision. I have to think it over. Okay, Mr. Duke. Okay. Mr. Duke's voice rose slightly and seemed to Vicki to have an angry, exasperated tone. But look here, kid. You keep your lip buttoned about this. If word got around about me having a good job open, every boy in Tampa would be after me. So not a word to anybody, okay? Okay, Joey said. I'll let you know. You do that, but remember what I said about keeping quiet. Mr. Duke got to his feet and picked his Panama hat off the hat rack by the booth and started for the door. He was tall, thin, sleek, and slightly overdressed. The shoulders of his jacket were just a little too padded, Vicki thought, and the lapels a little too pointed. His hair was thick and black and curly. His long face was deeply tan, and a hair-thin mustache spread across his upper lip. On impulse, Vicki stood up and casually followed him out the door of the snack bar and across the terminal building. When he stepped out into the sunshine of the taxi loading ramp, she hung back as he whistled for a cab. A taxi pulled up, and before Mr. Duke got in, he said to the driver, Granada Restaurant, Ubar City. Granada Restaurant, Ubar City, Vicki. Vicki's hands felt for the travel folder in her Vicki's hand felt for the travel folder in her jacket pocket. Why, that was the restaurant the old Mr. What was his name? Tyrell had tried to call her attention to, if he really had been trying to call her attention to it by leaving the folder on his seat in such a particular way with the words meeting place underlined. Vicki shook her head in bewilderment. It all seems too curious to be a coincidence. The frightened old man on the plane, the travel folder, and now this odd-looking man making such strange propositions to Joey, and then going to the very same restaurant. It seemed too curious to be a coincidence, but for the life of her, Vicki couldn't make any sense of it. Maybe she'd better go back to the snack bar and have a talk with Joey. When she entered the air-conditioned room again, the booth at which Joey and the strange man had been sitting was empty. Vicki shrugged and smiled to herself. Vicki Barr, with your imaginations, you ought to write a mystery story. You see deep, dark plots every time you look around. You would be spending your time better at the beach, getting a Florida suntan. She thrust all suspicions from her mind and went out to find a taxi. So that concludes Chapter 3. In the next episode, we'll continue this story and go on to Chapter 4. Good day, this is Live to Tape. We are recording the Vicki Barr Air Stewardess series, The Clue of the Golden Coin by Helen Wells. This is going to be Live to Tape, and so any flubs or stutters we're going to keep in. So we're going to start with Chapter 4. Well, we left off at Chapter 4, so we're going to start that. Chapter 4. Pirate Gold. One of the nicest things about Vicki's New York Tampa assignment was staying at the Curtis home. Yesterday afternoon, after Vicki had come from the airport, she and Louise had gone to the beach for a swim and began to work on Vicki's Florida suntan. After dinner, Mr. Curtin had taken the three girls to the movies. Appropriately enough, it had been a picture about pirates. You see, Mr. Curtin had said, smiling, we're real pirate-minded here in Tampa. We want to give you tourists the real good run for their money. Vicki loved the guest room, which was now called Vicki's room, with its flowered curtains and big four-poster bed. And everyone in the family, including Mrs. Tucker, the housekeeper, were understanding about hard-working airline stewardesses and why they sometimes had to sleep in late in the morning. Now the three girls were at brunch for Vicki at a small table on the side of the porch. The sun was shining brilliantly through the treetops and making little puddles of golden light on the tiles of the floor. The air was still and held a heavy perfume of oleander and hibiscus. Up in the trees, songbirds tweeted merrily. Birds are smarter than people, Vicki thought. They all go south for the winter. You'll be back in Tampa tomorrow, won't you, Vicki? Louise asked. Not tomorrow, Vicki corrected her. Sunday, and then one more trip, and I'll have a few days rest leave. Perfect. We'll spend the whole time at Clearwater Beach, just relaxing and lying in the sun, Nina said enthusiastically. Daddy will come take us out to Ybor City for dinner, and you'll come to my shop and see all the lovely things we have. Then we'll... Nina, dear, Louise interrupted. Vicki says this is a rest leave. Nina shook her silky black hair impatiently. Oh, who wants to get rest when there are so many more exciting things to do? I thought you had a job, Vicki said with a grin. Sure I have, and I work mighty hard at it too, but there's always time to have fun. This young dynamo wears me out, Louise laughed. I have work to do too, you know, Nina, and Vicki has to rest, but we'll manage to have fun. Don't you worry. All three were chatting gaily when Mr. Curtin stepped out through the open French doors onto the tile floor of the porch. His face looked drawn and haggard, and worried wrinkles creased the skin around his eyes. "Dad," Louisa cried, jumping up, "whatever are you doing home at noon?" "Dad," Louisa cried, jumping up, "whatever are you doing home at noon?" "Come and sit down, Daddy," Nina said. "Come and sit down," Nina said solicitously. "We're just finishing, but I imagine Mrs. Tucker can manage to find something for you." Mr. Curtin slumped into a high-backed wicker chair. "An awful thing has happened, girls," he said. He took off his glasses with a nervous gesture, rubbing his eyes, and ran his hands through his thinning gray hair. "I am the chairman of the committee, and I feel responsible. But—" He stopped and shook his head. "I don't know what to do about it." Louise ran to her father's side and took his hand in hers. "My goodness, Daddy, you look pale as a ghost. Whatever happened?" "Get me a cup of coffee, honey," Mr. Curtin said. I think I need something to steady my nerves." Louise ran to the kitchen. When she returned with a steaming cup of coffee, and her father had taken a few sips, Mr. Curtin took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair. "When it happened," he said, "I was so stunned. I just had to walk around for a while and think." "Daddy," Nina said with her eyes wide, "if you don't tell us what happened, we're all simply going to burst." Mr. Curtin managed a smile. "Sorry, honey. I'm not thinking very straight." He paused for a moment, then continued. "You remember I told you the other night about the collection of antique gold coins that my committee was bringing down here from New York to exhibit during the festival week? Well, the case from the museum was delivered to the exhibition hall this morning. Being the committee chairman, I was there to receive it. It was all secure and wrapped tightly around with steel bands, but when we opened it, we found that it was filled, not with gold coins, but with worthless pieces of scrap iron." Vicky's mouth dropped open. Speechless, Louise clapped her hands to her lips, and her eyes grew wide. Nina said, "Daddy, that's impossible." "Yes, that's what you'd think," her father replied. "Had the box been tampered with?" Louise asked after a minute. "It didn't seem so," Mr. Kern said. "As I say it, it was taped with steel bands, and the shipping label from the museum in New York was intact. It had come down from New York yesterday by Air Express." "Air Express?" Vicky almost screamed the question. "Then it might have come down our flight." Suddenly she remembered the mysterious Mr. Jones, whom Kathy had said "cop" written all over him. And then there was the odd fact that he and Captain March had boarded the plane in the hangar. Before she could marshal these confusing thoughts in her mind, Mr. Curtin went on. "That's right, Vicky. Air Express. The case stayed in the warehouse out at the airport overnight, under heavy guard, I might add, and was delivered to the exhibition hall about 10 o'clock this morning." "And it hadn't been tampered with, opened up?" Vicky asked the question again. "If it had," Mr. Kern said, "it was the cleverest of tampering jobs I've ever seen." What were the coins worth?" Vicky asked. "From the standpoint of their value as antiques," Mr. Curtin answered, "they were priceless. For the gold they contained, figuring gold at $35 an ounce, possibly $100,000, maybe twice that." "Phew! But who could have stolen the gold?" Nina asked. "Lots of people," Vicky said. "The people at the museum who packed it, the transfer people who tucked it into the airport, the cargo crew at the New York airport, the cargo crew here at Tampa, the truckers who delivered it from the field to the exhibition hall. Heaven knows how many people could have got that gold shipment." "At any rate," Mr. Curtin said, "the Tampa police called the FBI, and if the FBI can't clear it up, I don't know who can."